the alphabet, some of the letters, without knowing some words formally or informally, even if they're only curse words or stuff that's been written on the wall. You know, there is some kind of pre-literacy in almost every child, and I like to begin the program on the basis of that kind of pre-literacy, and on the basis also of learning how the child learns, how the child will face new material. The other thing that I do as a beginning phonics thing for every child is give them their name the first day of school, spelled out, and then also give them their name cut up, okay? And give them their name cut up as a way to both reassemble it, to look at how the thing is constructed. This, by the way, by giving them this, in a sense, there's almost no failing. In other words, I'm not cutting this one up and saying reconstruct it. I'm trying to put it in a situation where the child is always in a position of being able to do it. Then I usually play some phonic name games with each individual child. I like, by the way, collective learning. My feeling is if one skill is in the classroom, if one child has a skill, that skill therefore is potentially teachable by that child to someone else. And that you can take advantage of that knowledge if you set the moral tone right. Because in some classes which are highly competitive, if you teach someone what you know, you're giving away your competitive advantage, and you can't do that, right? Okay. So you've got to have the right kind of collective tone in order to get shared knowledge. But, well, the other games we'll play is, for example, we'll take all of these letters, once a lot of the kids understand how to put their own names together, throw them in a pile, and see if the kids can reconstruct each other's names. And how many names the kids can do. There are a whole bunch of name games. If a kid objects to playing games with their names, you drop it. But the other thing, for example, I'll play a lot with, we did this with Patrice's, I guess, 4-year-old, literate young man, and is pull the pat out of Patrice, okay, and begin to build some phonic variations special to him. You know, that is that pat can become sat, which is also can become cat. Okay, so there's some sense to my idea is that if you take a core of highly charged words, you can get just about all the principles of phonics in the English language in that series of that core of words. Paulo Freire talks about this in teaching adult literacy in Brazil. I'll give you an example. If you look at the word, if you look at Ford, cool. Depends on the culture, and Coca-Cola. And think of another set. You can get as funky as you want, or you can be as prurient as you like. As you know, it depends on what you're willing to tolerate and what your community is willing to tolerate. You can get this list, which is so familiar and so immediately charged for the kids, and all of the phonic principles. You just make sure you have one silent E and something that's vaguely polysyllabic. You know, and I guess my feeling is not all the skills need to be taught. You see, some students eventually will need a lot more kind of drill, and some kids will need to have to go over the same thing over and over again. But the great majority of the students, once they understand that this is pat, cat, sat, you don't have to tell them that that's going to be fat. They already made that leap, and to give them 6 pages of drill on that isn't at all relevant. Anyway, so this is one way. We do a lot of labeling, for example. It's another way of playing with phonics, initial phonics. What I mean by labeling, we call label games, is essentially going around with letters and putting letters on the things that begin with them. You know, like I have B's and F's and H's. You go around the room and label everything that begins with that, and if you want to get a little bit more complex, you label everything that ends with it. You know, hand, you label with a D instead of an H. We have, for example, a board, and the board has all the letters of the alphabet with it and nails. And then we have, we cut out a whole bunch of different range of typefaces. And the kids, to start out, the youngest kids, 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, just matching typefaces. Big A's and little A's, a D that's this size and a D that's this size. A D from a newspaper that's boldface and one that has serif. The other thing that we do is cut out pictures, and really interesting picture games. You have a little cat. Say a picture of a cat. You ask kids where the cat would go. You can put a cat on C, but you can also put it on A for animal, and you can also put it on T if its name is Tabby. In other words, you can play a lot of, there's a dog, for example. My dog is a golden retriever, so you can put it on dog, you can put it on monster because he's outrageously large. You can put it on G for golden retriever, R for retriever, C for canine. So you begin to do both mind shifts as well as actual phonics. All of the material I showed you, plus a lot of matching things we made and a couple of the other games we play, we give to the parents the first couple of days of school and tell them to do it at home with the kids. Take it home. Share the knowledge. Let the parents learn that they too can teach their own children.
Students learn in many different ways, by looking, hearing, writing, moving, interacting. Some respond better to one than to another, so it would seem to be a good idea for a teacher to have several of these approaches at her disposal in order to individualize the process according to the needs of her students. Flashcards are one such tool, very traditional and very effective for this child working on this skill. The approach is one-to-one, and the visuals can be chosen or even tailor-made to suit specific needs and interests.
All right, the next letter is what? What's that? See, what sound does it make? Okay.
This is a way of spelling the sound O.
In this example, several learning processes combine to reinforce each other.
O-A, coat. O. Can you make it in the air and say it, please? O-A, coat. O. Again.
The child hears, sees, physically shapes, repeats, and then writes a particular phonic combination as a means of internalizing the skill.
Okay. O-A, coat. O. I'll put it right in front of you. Again. Wait a minute, Richard. I want it large. O-A, coat. O.
This is a highly structured approach, and for some students, the most effective. The teacher is Nancy Knight.
This is a method that was developed by Beth Slingerland for children who had specific language disabilities. And I find that it's very useful for me to use with all children because it's very precise. Something that's dependable and something that the child can always use.
Bingo! Yeah, you want to have that tiny toy tambourine.
These students, enjoying a game of phonics bingo, are practicing their skills in a way that is relaxed, non-threatening, and fun. It's a welcome change of pace and brings together kids of various abilities in a cooperative learning situation.
Bingo! So many bingos, wow. Bingo! Bashful boy. Bingo! You're really good at this, wow.
Phonics games are very important as practice activities once a particular element has been introduced to the children. This helps the children to internalize what they've learned and overlearn it. And in order to use phonics successfully, it has to come very naturally, and it really does have to be an overlearned skill. So these are important.
We saw that movie. We saw a lot of shows.
Start from the very beginning with books. It seems to me that the crucial thing is to base a reading program on books that are interesting and exciting and of value to the kids, that charm them, amuse them, make them cry, teach them something they didn't learn before. But I found that the one thing that happens is that for the very, very young readers, there are a number of really quite simple, basic, lovely books. Those 35-cent Scholastic magazine books that they ask the kids to order, I use that. I go around and scrounge at garage sales and get old children's books, much better than most of the readers that they have in school. At the beginning of the year, I have this storytelling time, or story reading time, and I read a lot of books, and I read books to the kids so that when they pick up the books the next day, they'll already know what's in them. Now, a lot of times you give the kids a book and you say, well, you can find out the end when you get there. But the kid's struggling over the phonics, and you haven't, in a sense, prepared the child to pretend to read. And I've pretty much discovered that pretending to read, you know, when the kid sits down and looks in your eyes and says, this Max wore his wolf suit last night, and you know he's not, or she's not reading. But I've discovered that in effect that is a real attempt to read, and it really is a kind of very important experience and familiarity with the book.
In Shantyland, people love this read of Waku and time was Nancy had 6 sons. First son was called Sika. He had the gift of seeing trouble a long way off.
I think I've memorized 400 books this year. It's insane. You can read them over and over again. And I provide each child the opportunity to read with me 5 minutes a day. That means the classroom has to be set up in such a way that I don't have to run after the kids all the time, and that I don't have to be the constant manager and governor and mediator, which means the environment has to be interesting enough. The kids have to. That means, by the way, it's very hard 2 months. The first 2 months are very, very difficult in terms of establishing your expectations and letting the kids know that you have predictable limits and that, they can't kill each other and they can't kill themselves and they can't, but even more for me, they can't interfere with anyone else who's working or playing a game and they can't destroy anybody else's work. What?
What really could
We're reading. I'll be right there.
I saw him.
You did? Who's that?
I don't know.
Remember that JT? Remember we saw him in the movie? You excuse me, I'll be with you in a minute, alright? We're really cool.
I want to show you what I want to do.
Okay. One second. As soon as I finish this stuff. Okay, let's go. Why don't you go ask them? And excuse us for a minute.
I'm not gonna get shot. Hey,
Try one more thing. I'm constantly making up a phonic program for that particular child. You think that's all sound over there? I'm looking for what kind of phonics, what of my repertoire of my knowledge about phonics can facilitate this child reading this book now, and what things might I prepare later, because occasionally you prepare an exercise sheet, or some kids, when you see are moving much more slowly, you do a lot more reinforcing. You look at, you're not supposed to look up there, you're down here.
It
Come on.
was.
At that point is when you pull out little, letters of this sort where the kids can put letters together and change the words, phonic wheels. There are a whole range and variety of materials, but the materials I kind of pull eclectically according to what I see this particular child needs at this particular time to acquire the power to read the book.
And his umbrella to keep the sun from off his face.
Okay.
Whose turn?
Whose turn? Who hasn't read yet? Let me see. Get me Tonya or Derek's read. Tonya or Celine or Kathy or one of them, all right? What is it, darling?
And
The other thing that I do is the kids write every day. That's the one compulsory thing in our class.
once upon a time there was a plane full of superheroes named. I wrote so far.
By now, our first graders are, of our six, it's a K1, of our 16 first graders, 14 of them are writing independently in small groups. They're just doing superhero comic books and Visit to a Strange Planet and all kinds of funny things. But with the writing, with the reading, the phonics then can become an adjunct. For some of the kids, for example, who move much more slowly, essentially tell them, okay, instead of you doing a poem, I'll write a poem, why don't you copy it? And the poem essentially is Pat sat on the hat, which is phonic reinforcement.
We run across for kids that have dialectic patterns from living in cultural difference. Like a lot of black kids won't use ED.
Doesn't bother me. You listen to me, I'm from New York, right? I swallow lots of my letters. I found myself the first time I took a course in phonics, it was from some professor from the Midwest. And I remember he was telling me all of these things about the proper pronunciation of these things, and it didn't make any sense to me at all. It wasn't the way I said them. It wasn't the way I talked. I found, for example, that a lot of kids can do code switching, can move from one language to another. In writing, I let the kids write as they hear it. That's intelligent guessing. I don't get very... It's funny, everybody seems to think it's a very major problem, and I haven't really experienced it as a major problem, but primarily I think because I spend an awful lot of time getting the kids to talk. I think that's the other thing I really hadn't said, but discussions, talk, conversation. The more of that preparatory to and involved in reading, the better. If I'll set out to do a reading, and let's say occasionally we'll all sit with the same book, a couple of books that everybody might read. If I do 2 sentences or 1 paragraph, and everybody wants to talk about that, and my lesson said that I'm supposed to go through 5 pages, I'll forget the 5 pages and spend the time that it takes on those couple of sentences. And that really begins to I think, make it possible for kids to hear each other's languages. Remember, nobody in this country, no diverse classroom in this country is going to have any single uniform speech pattern. It just doesn't hardly exist.
And yet when they read, they transpose was to were or streets to street if it's in their speech pattern.
Yes, but you see, you got to realize that's not incorrect.
No, it doesn't seem incorrect to me either, but
No.
it's interesting, really.
What I'm saying is that you're talking about 2 languages, and so what's happening is not a transposition, but a translation. Okay? You're translating from one language as powerful into another language equally powerful. And when you make that translation, you're doing a very different thing. And when the teacher puts the moral judgment on it, you're degrading the language, is when the trouble comes in.
The relationship between phonics and reading is an enigma to many people, authorities and practitioners alike. There seem to be hundreds of solid questions, but few truly satisfying answers. And when it comes to non-standard English, cultural background enters the mix, and solid answers seem even more elusive. Here is how one teacher expressed her dilemma in a question and answer session with Dr. William Glasser.
You get all the signs that the answer to all reading problems is phonics. And people who have different phonological systems will have difficulty in reading. But then communication research says that the verbal symbol or the visual symbol is only 7%. Over 90% of language is the overlay of stress, juncture, body language, and the whole culture. And so if we say phonics is the answer to reading, it really loses the life and soul of that printed page if the child will just be paying attention to, I don't have a lot of air in my P and T and K, and if I pay attention to all my P, T, and K's, I lose all the message in reading. What is your opinion about phonics, and how can we convince people that phonics have discouraged people like me and people of my kind from reading?
Well, I don't have any good answer for that except the age-old answer that there are certain things that people deeply believe in and they have nothing to do with whether they're true or not. And one of the deep, inherent, good, sound American beliefs is in phonics. And it is, that's all. Because there's a lot of people that have a lot of influence in this country that learn to read through phonics. Or if they didn't, they think they did, which is about the same thing. And, I mean, you made as eloquent a statement as you could make about phonics. There's no scientific evidence that phonics is the way to learn to read. But if you give up phonics, then people will point out to you what seems to have an obvious truth, that the reason you're having difficulty with reading is we're not using phonics anymore. And then if you go back to phonics 100%, people will say, well, you're not doing it 200% like you should. The point is that it's always easy to find a simple, pat answer for the problem. But phonics, they're okay. A kid learns through phonics, it's fine. But it's not the answer. If it were the answer, then there would be no reading problem.
We usually strongly advise that a child have some phonic instruction to help him in decoding skills, but that reading not be held up on the basis of phonics, because some kids don't need it. In fact, it's always amusing to hear upper grade teachers and secondary teachers say, well, I can't teach reading, I don't know phonics. And of course, they read very, very well.
From my own standpoint, I think that the best, most effective, and most educationally efficient way of learning phonics skills is to practice them, or rather to learn them through writing, and then to practice them through reading.
I am not in favor of programs that use phonics as the primary instructional strategy. For one thing, I don't think that such programs take advantage of what children really know about language. They tend to be very synthetic in that they ask children to put together, or first learn bits and pieces of information and put those bits and pieces together, often without any regard to the fact that these children frequently have no idea at all about what the reading process is all about.
Every teacher ought to know as much about phonics as they can possibly learn, and then use all of that knowledge the way in which one would use a thesaurus or a dictionary or any other kind of reference work. When you see a particular need in a particular student for a particular bit of phonic drill or for a particular game that involves phonics, use that. But to use phonics as the content and substance of the reading curriculum is to eliminate reading and to replace it with obedience and drilling.
In thinking about what our guests have said, it seems to us there is a consensus on these points. That knowledge and understanding of phonics is a highly useful decoding skill, but just one of many involved in learning to read. That it has different value for different students at different times. That for some it's not a prerequisite at all. And finally, that there's a great deal more to reading than simply decoding. Finding the proper role of phonics in your classroom is a matter of choosing what makes the most sense for you and your students, and the goals you have collectively set. Our next program, Helping the Reluctant Reader, offers numerous practical tips for dealing with familiar reading problems. See you then.